Origins of the Elvis Cult, a short story. A rogue professor in some distant age ventures the bold hypothesis that Elvis was not omnipresent. Spikenard was always a troublemaker, said the balding dean. In front, on his desk, marked with the reds, was the letter of protest. "Dear Sir," it said, "I write you in great distress." 6 pages later, it was signed by Fillmore Ray Jr., acting CEO of Gracelands. "We have heard," it said, "that your Professor Spikey has almost spilled the blasphemous beans." There was little doubt that this was the case. The only question was whether and how to punish. Would he be given the chance to defend himself? Would they investigate his email? Thus began Spikenard's struggle for justice. He wrote to the papers and outraged the academic community. "I am a victim of pressure," he pleaded. The thrust of his argument, ludicrous though it may seem, was that the king was not, in fact, everyone and everywhere, contrary to the hallowed memory and canonical accounts. On the other hand, urged the professor, numerous citizens in those distant days would dress up as Elvis, and thus he could appear in several venues on the single night. Historically, he explained, this was how the entire phenomenon started. "Think about it," he urged in several interviews. "There appears to be no doubt that we have records of the Preswellian presence. My hypothesis is that this is because there were, organised or independent, a veritable army of impersonators, not true attested sightings." By his own admission, he had very little evidence to support this outlandish conclusion. Some remarked such as, "Who would have thought the quest for the historical Elvis would have come to this?" despairing. Some got the shocks, others were disturbed. Among the learned colleagues were some who were persuaded that the theory had some legs, but the same said that Spikenard could walk it on his own. "It is obvious," said one, preferring not to be named, "that this conclusion would undermine the entire foundations. If Elvis was not omnipresent, then he might have been just another rock and roller, good but nothing supernatural." Spikenard vowed to avoid all consequences. "My only concern is for the truth," he said, "and my superannuation." The incident in the lift to the political sociology department occurred on May the 9th. There was Spikenard carrying his laptop, and there was Kate the sandwich board, a research assistant from archaeology. Larry Woodwinder, head of the Grades and Outlays Committee, got on at floor 4. "Morning, Gordon," he said, not really interested. He got out of the 6th, evidently heading for the fax machine. It was after that, according to Kate, that Spikenard turned to her and made a short remark upon some intimate pink item of her female anatomy. "He then grabbed me and rubbed his big and private at my thigh, puffing like a plastic bag," she said, going hysterical again. Spikenard denied it all. The Staff Discipline Subcommittee of the Ethics, Standards and Professional Development Committee, headed by outsiders, found no firm grounds for prosecution, but as Spikenard said, the damage had been done. Women from throughout the campus wanted him banned from elevators and other confined spaces. "I have no doubt," Spikenard said, "that this is all connected." Nevertheless, radical speculation is one thing, and a theoretical refutation of the king's triumph over time and space is quite another. It seemed to many that the professor was forging an offensive doctrine. Further pressure came from beyond. Head of the fan club was furious. "These academics think they can just step on our blue suede shoes," he retorted to reporters. Spikenard admitted advocating the separation of state and fan club, marking him a liberal in the popular mind. Spikenard would have us believe, said one of the involved, that Elvis Aaron simply passed away and was never seen again. You don't need to be a believer to see how ridiculous that is. Many pointed to numerous sightings at Burger King. Others pointed to the testimony of Priscilla. What would Spikenard and the academics make of that? There was also trouble on the home front. The daughter, Cindy May, said she never could. She was actually disgusted. It has placed a big, strained belt across our relationship, she told NewsHour. For my father is cerebral, while I'm just a hunker burning love. She didn't believe in asking too many questions. Elvis lived, Elvis died, Elvis was seen at truck stops throughout the South. This was her simple faith. One should be able to distinguish work from private deed, she said, but this is an issue that strikes at the core of popular entertainment. If Elvis was not omnipresent, as Spikenard maintained, then the whole edifice would crumble. The heart of rockabilly lay exposed. Is the so-called truth worthy of such a price, she wanted to know. For a start, Spikenard explained, oftentimes, drawing a map on the whiteboard, the king did not die of adulation, as commonly supposed. I have found evidence that he died of wholesale medical neglect and other natural causes. The whole thing about his glorious death swoon is a myth. Various students would burst into laughter. The truly worrying thing, though, is that various students would not. Young minds, impressionable sensoriums, were often willing to give his theory a show, counterintuitive though it was. There were several young men in particular who aped the bold professor's stance, shaved their sideburns, and made a nuisance of themselves, contradicting young adherents. They advocated Chuck Berry. The truly devious thing about Spikenard's hypothesis was not, however, in its appeal to the young, but in its shameless exploitation of the admitted weaknesses in the Elvis creed. There were absolute ructions across campus and beyond, the day the mad professor described certain hallowed artefacts as, quote, C-grade exploitation flicks, unquote. He was challenged in the staff room. Are you saying, said Kent from engineering, that Elvis Goes West was seen as a bad film? In its time, yes, said Sparky. In its historical context, yes. Kent was glad he was teaching engineering. According to my research, the professor went on, the critics, at the time, never gave it more than 1.5 stars. Even a smashing performance from Stephanie Zimbalist couldn't save it. Cranky Andrews from accounting heard this as he wandered through and made hand signals up behind the intense professor's head, intimating that he must have come from Mars. Colleagues, secretly sympathetic, hid behind their papers, the prospects of poverty outweighing their convictions. Isn't it true, asked someone, that Elvis in Las Vegas was the biggest selling record of its time? But it's possible, said the professor, that he was successful on record but not so good on film. This sounded lame. No one could be bothered trying to imagine such an unlikely turn of events. And anyway, none of this is evidence that he was in any way omnipresent. That's a separate issue. You didn't answer the question, said someone else. Was it or was it not the biggest seller of its time? Spikenard squirmed. It was, he admitted, defeated again. A further complication of the Spikenard's bold suggestion also caught some public comment. This was his assertion that, contrary to all prevailing views, Forrest Gump had never really met the king. This is now generally admitted, he would say. Scholars throughout Europe know it to be true. Not a scholar in Europe came to his defence. It was, on the contrary, well known, even to the point of being a truism, that Gump had taught the king to wobble on his legs. He unleashed a generation, everyone would say. Next, said some wit, Spikenard will tell us that Forrest Gump was just a phantom of the films and not a historical man at all, as if Elvis had no apostles. Perhaps, Spiky would reply, but that doesn't make Elvis omnipresent. It's a later development of the cultus. In the early strata, he's just a guy, a little chubby, with a passion for amphetamines and guns. The only other thing we can know about him for sure is that he loved his mum. Spikenard couldn't find a single verifiable sighting. They were all impersonators, but this was statistically unlikely. The boycotts began in June. By July, Spikenard sat rigid before the real discipline committee. After a good defence, they got him on a technicality. "Didn't you say," he was asked, "that Elvis fans might as well say that Bjorn from ABBA was omniscient, predicting 7 hits from 7 singles?" Spikenard admitted that he might have said something to that effect. This was ruled inciting unrest. His licence to teach was revoked. Plans for the documentary went on hold. His bank manager broke out in a sweat. On a cold September day, fans broke into his apartment and urinated on his keyboard. Cindy May ran away and was never seen again. A pimply youth with braces stopped him on the street and said, "You're the kook that says that Elvis was just a man." By the time he recanted, it was over. British scholars had responded. Authorities from Kentucky had made a full report. Elvis, they concluded, has had his share of brave detractors, but the fact remains he was the king, and no one shall surpass him. As a joke, the day that Spikenard vacated from his office, the bald dean came on the public address and declared in a tone of triumph, "Spikenard has left the building." The students cheered. Girls turned to their Elvis posters and felt his presence warmly. His wide, dark face smiled and shined, transcending its era. An unassailable aura hung around his image. He clearly had the look of a man who had done the rounds of Memphis and brought a spirit of deliverance to the world.